The stars had never felt as vast as they did that day. The human race, under the banner of the United Earth Federation, had boldly ventured into the unknown, exploring distant star systems, collecting data, and forging peaceful relationships with any intelligent life they encountered. But as peaceful as humanity's intentions were, the galaxy had other plans. It started as a routine mission for the USS Vanguard, a massive warship designed to defend humanity's interests at the edge of the galaxy. Captain Amelia Brody, seasoned, tactical, and sharp, stood on the bridge, eyes trained on the monitor. Her crew was loyal, composed of some of Earth's brightest minds, scientists, engineers, and soldiers. The mission seemed simple enough: investigate an anomalous energy signal coming from a remote, uncharted system. But when the Vanguard entered the system, things took a turn for the worse. The energy readings intensified. Suddenly, the ship's sensors were overwhelmed by an incoming transmission, a broadcast in a language no human had ever heard, though it was clear it was directed toward them. Captain Brody ordered a deep scan, and the results were unsettling. "Captain, the source of the transmission, it's not just a message. It's a warning," said Lieutenant Jameson, the ship's communications officer. His fingers danced over the controls, trying to decipher the alien signals. "They're calling for reinforcements." Amelia's gut tightened. "How long until we can identify them?" "Not long, Captain," Jameson replied, his voice thick with tension. "I've isolated part of the transmission. There's a fleet on the move." A sick realization gripped the captain. This wasn't some primitive alien species attempting to communicate. No, this was a declaration of war. The signal was a distress call, but not for peace. The crew braced themselves as the Vanguard's sensors locked onto the incoming ships. The massive fleet of dark, angular vessels began to emerge from the system's nebula. They were unlike any ships humanity had ever encountered, sleek, biomechanical in appearance, and powered by energy signatures that were both unfamiliar and threatening. Their silhouette struck terror into the hearts of even the most battle-hardened officers. "We have incoming," Captain Brody said, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "All hands, prepare for battle." The alien fleet's ships locked their weapons onto the human ship in a perfect synchrony, a terrifying display of advanced technology. The first blast hit the Vanguard's shields, sending shockwaves across the ship, but the shields held. "For now. This is it," Brody muttered. Humanity's first intergalactic war. The alien ships launched a barrage of energy weapons, and the Vanguard's crew quickly moved into defensive positions. The tactical team, led by Commander Aaron Walker, began their countermeasures, launching flares and jamming signals to confuse the incoming alien fire. "Sir, they're adapting. Their weapons are locking onto our shield frequencies," said Lieutenant Klein, the tactical officer. The data coming in was clear: the enemy was sophisticated, possibly centuries ahead in terms of technology. The first battle was chaotic, fast-paced, and brutal. The Vanguard fired back, utilizing all the weaponry at its disposal, from railguns to energy torpedoes. Yet every time the humans launched a counterattack, the aliens seemed to anticipate it, dodging or countering with ruthless efficiency. Captain Brody's thoughts raced as she observed the battle unfolding. "We need to buy time. Evacuate non-essential personnel and prep the escape pods." There was no question in her mind that Earth was not prepared for what was coming. Their technology, though impressive by human standards, was no match for the sheer scale and power of the alien fleet. Yet there was one thing that the captain knew: humanity had something the aliens didn't have. They had grit. And the human spirit was known for fighting back when cornered. "We're not running," she said, her voice cold as steel. "We fight." Despite the terrifying odds, Brody rallied her crew, inspiring them to hold their ground. It was clear that this was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of a new chapter in human history, and humanity had just been thrust into a war against a race of aliens who had the ability to overwhelm even their most advanced defenses. But something was off. The alien ships didn't seem to be aiming for any particular target other than the Vanguard. Why this one ship, and why now? The answer would soon become clear. As the first battle raged on, the mystery deepened. The aliens weren't just hostile, they were hunting something. But what could it be? As the first wave of enemy ships surged forward, Captain Brody's thoughts turned to the possibilities ahead. Humanity had never faced an enemy like this, and the stakes had never been higher. The battle for survival had begun, and with it, the first chapter of humanity's intergalactic war. The rest of the crew watched as Brody steadied herself, determined to protect humanity at all costs. The battle was far from over, but it had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The USS Vanguard was still reeling from the initial assault. The ship had endured multiple hits to its outer hull, and even though the shield generators held, the crew knew that this could only last for so long. Captain Brody paced back and forth on the bridge, her eyes locked onto the holographic display showing the positions of the alien ships. "Captain, the enemy fleet is regrouping," Lieutenant Klein reported, his voice tense. "They're forming a battle formation around us. It's a pincer strategy." Brody's mind raced. The aliens were coordinating their attack with a precision that was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. But she wasn't about to back down. "We need to retaliate. Break their formation," she ordered, voice steady but intense. Commander Aaron Walker, the ship's battle strategist, stepped forward, scanning the tactical map on the central screen. "We need to use their overconfidence against them. They're relying on their numbers, but they've got one major flaw: they're not expecting us to hit them hard enough to break their cohesion. If we can force them into disarray, they'll lose their coordination." "Agreed," Brody said. "What's our plan?" Walker quickly began issuing commands to the tactical crew. "We'll fire our main cannons to create an opening, then deploy 2 fighter squads to breach their defenses and take out their communication nodes. If we sever their coordination, we can throw them into chaos." Brody nodded, a fire burning in her chest. "Do it. We don't have time to waste." The crew moved swiftly, and the Vanguard took up its defensive position, facing down the advancing alien fleet. The enemy ships loomed ominously, their dark hulls glimmering in the void of space. The tension was palpable. The crew was about to launch humanity's first counteroffensive in an intergalactic war. Brody glanced at her crew, noting the determination in their eyes. These were not just soldiers, they were humanity's last line of defense. She knew that this was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a fight for their future, for the survival of every human being across the stars. "Engage," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The Vanguard's main cannons fired with a deafening roar, sending a salvo of energy bolts into the ranks of the alien fleet. The blast hit their lead ships, creating massive explosions that rocked the fleet. The enemy vessels faltered for a brief moment, their advanced shields struggling to absorb the force of the assault. "Direct hit on their forward fleet," Lieutenant Klein reported. "They're breaking formation. Now!" Brody shouted. The fighter squads launched from the Vanguard, streaking toward the alien ships with blistering speed. The human fighters, nimble and agile, darted around the enemy ships, avoiding incoming fire with ease. They aimed for the weak points, communication arrays, power cores, anything that could disrupt the alien coordination. The battle was fierce. The alien ships retaliated quickly, unleashing their own barrage of weaponry. Human fighters were hit, but they fought back with reckless abandon, determined to disable the alien fleet. One of the fighters, piloted by Lieutenant Sasha Novak, dove straight into an alien vessel's command center. She locked onto the enemy's communication hub, sending a burst of focused energy into the structure. The result was immediate. The alien ships went silent for a moment, their coordinated movements disrupted as they scrambled to regain control. "We've broken their communications," Novak reported, her voice breathless over the comms. "The fleet is losing cohesion." "Excellent work," Brody responded, a brief sense of relief washing over her. But the battle was far from over. The alien fleet, now in disarray, attempted to regroup, but it was clear that they were no longer the unified force they had been just moments before. The Vanguard capitalized on this weakness, using its superior agility and firepower to pick off the isolated alien ships one by one. "Keep the pressure on them," Captain Brody commanded, her eyes locked onto the chaotic battlefield. "Don't give them a chance to recover." With the alien fleet in disarray, the humans pressed their advantage. The Vanguard's railguns tore through the alien ships' hulls, sending debris scattering across space. The human fighters swarmed through the gaps, targeting weak spots and ensuring that no enemy vessel could regroup. "We're making progress, Captain," Commander Walker said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "They're retreating. They don't have the cohesion they need to fight back effectively." Brody watched as the alien ships began to retreat, slowly but surely. The battle had turned in humanity's favor, but she knew this was only a temporary victory. The alien forces were far from defeated, they would return, stronger and more determined than ever. But for now, the humans had proven one thing: they could fight back. They had made their mark on the galaxy, and no one, especially not the alien invaders, could deny their tenacity. As the final alien ships retreated into the darkness of space, Brody allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. Humanity had fought its first intergalactic war, and for the first time, it had emerged victorious. But the war was far from over. The aliens would be back. And this time, humanity would be ready. The victory over the alien fleet, though decisive, had not come without its costs. The USS Vanguard limped back to Earth's orbit, its hull scarred from the battle, its systems strained. The once mighty warship was a reminder of just how close humanity had come to annihilation. Yet, the victory had ignited a fire within the hearts of Earth's citizens. Humanity, though battered, had proven it was capable of standing its ground. On Earth's surface, cities that had never known war were now brimming with activity. Military leaders, scientists, and engineers scrambled to understand what had just happened, and prepare for what was to come. The alien invaders, though beaten in this first encounter, were far from finished. The victory had only bought humanity precious time. Captain Brody stood at the helm of the Vanguard as it docked at Earth's orbital station. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead of her pressing down on her shoulders. It wasn't just the war that weighed on her, it was what had come from the war. The aliens, whom humanity now called the Orcs, had sent a signal before retreating, one that was somehow different from the first. "We've been trying to decode it, Captain," Lieutenant Jameson said, his fingers flying over his console. "It's not a distress call. It's something else. A challenge. A promise." "A promise?" Brody asked, raising an eyebrow. Jameson nodded. "It's like they're taunting us. They've let us know we're not safe, not yet. The Orcs are sending reinforcements. And we're not just talking about ships." Brody turned, her eyes sharp. "What does that mean?" "They're planning something on the ground," Jameson replied, unease creeping into his voice. "Their next move won't just be in space." Brody's mind raced as the implications set in. The Orcs had attacked with incredible force, but this was a declaration of intent. The next phase of the war would not be fought among the stars. It would be fought on Earth itself. "I need to see the data," Brody said, her voice firm. Minutes later, the analysis was on the table. The Orcs had sent signals through every available communication channel, their words laced with venom and mockery. Their fleet, already large, was assembling a massive ground force. The humans had won the first battle in space, but the real fight was about to begin. The Orcs weren't just aiming to wipe out humanity, they wanted to make an example of them. "We'll have to adapt," Brody said, her mind already working through strategies. "The enemy is coming to Earth. We need to prepare for an assault like nothing we've seen before." The strategy room on Earth's orbital command was filled with military leaders, scientists, and diplomats. Earth's defenses were stretched thin, and the resources to equip the entire planet were limited. Yet, they all knew that the next fight would determine whether humanity would continue its existence or be wiped out. "Captain, we've been analyzing their behavior. The Orcs aren't just invaders, they're conquerors," Commander Walker said, his voice grim. Their strategy is ruthless. They'll land forces across multiple continents and strike with precision. If they take control of our major cities, they'll crush us. What's our best course of action? Brody asked. We need to spread out our forces, Walker continued. We can't concentrate on one front. The Koraths will exploit any weaknesses, any gaps in our defense. We need to engage them on every continent and prevent them from taking our cities. Brody nodded, weighing his words. The Koraths were formidable. But humanity had one thing the Koraths lacked, the will to fight for survival. And Brody intended to make that will clear in every battle that was coming. We'll need all available forces, including reserves, Brody said, standing tall. And I want to make sure our civilians are prepared too. This isn't just a military fight. It's a fight for our very way of life. Commander Walker smiled faintly. I've been hearing reports from the ground. People are ready. They've seen what we're capable of. That's the spirit we need, Brody said. Now, let's make sure we don't lose that momentum. The war had entered a new phase. Space battles were no longer the primary concern. Earth's cities, forests, and deserts were the new battlefields. Humanity would need to adapt its strategy, combine their technological advancements with their innate resourcefulness. But the Koraths were not a species to be underestimated. The message they sent was a promise: they would return, more determined and far more dangerous than before. As the days passed, Earth's defenses were bolstered. New technologies were developed, new tactics devised. The United Earth Federation was not simply reacting to the Koraths' attacks, they were planning an offensive of their own. But Brody knew that this fight, on Earth's soil, would be humanity's greatest challenge. The Koraths would come. But humanity was ready. It would fight for every inch of ground, for every city, for every life. The tide of war was shifting. And this time, humanity would not just survive, it would rise. The countdown had begun. Humanity's defenses were set, but no one knew exactly what they were up against. The Koraths had promised to bring war to Earth, and the first wave of their ground forces was on the move. Cities had been fortified, soldiers trained, and weapons readied. Yet, despite all their preparation, the tension was palpable. It was one thing to prepare for a fight in space, it was another to fight an invading force on your home soil, where every victory or defeat would be felt directly by families, friends, and neighbors. Captain Amelia Brody stood in Earth's primary defense command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic map of Earth. It showed the deployment of humanity's military assets, as well as the rapidly approaching Korath forces. The planet's major cities were the primary targets, with massive Korath ground assault ships descending from orbit like giant, menacing shadows. The first target, New York City. Intel reports confirmed, an advanced Korath ground force is touching down in Central Park, Lieutenant Klein said, his voice sharp and steady despite the urgency in the air. The initial wave is heavy, but they're expecting more. We have approximately 45 minutes before they reach the city center. Get the 3rd and 7th Mobile Divisions in position, Brody ordered, her voice resolute. We need to slow them down. Protect the civilians, and then push them back. Understood, Captain. I'll have our forces on the ground immediately, Klein replied. He quickly relayed the orders to the ground commanders, and soon the Defense Force units were mobilizing. The tension in the room only grew as reports flooded in. Ground-based defense systems, built over the past few years in anticipation of this very moment, powered up. New York's military leadership activated shields, drones, and energy barricades in a last-ditch effort to delay the Koraths. The city's skies were alive with aircraft and armored units, each racing to fortify the zones under threat. Meanwhile, at the heart of the battle, the Koraths had begun their assault. Massive transport ships, hulking, insectoid-looking crafts, landed in the city with an eerie quietness. The moment their landing gear touched the ground, their enormous energy cannons fired, blowing apart any human defenses that stood in their way. Captain, they're charging, Commander Walker's voice came through the comms, steady but with an edge of concern. The Koraths are deploying ground units faster than we anticipated. We're taking heavy casualties. Brody's heart clenched. The Koraths weren't like any force humanity had fought before. Their technology was incomprehensibly advanced, and their tactics were ruthless, cutting through human lines with brutal precision. Yet, as Brody stared at the holographic map, she saw something that gave her a glimmer of hope: humanity wasn't done fighting. Deploy the backup drones. We need to buy time for our forces to regroup, she ordered. The battle for New York was fierce. The streets were turned into war zones. Tanks, drones, and soldiers clashed with Korath ground troops, horrifyingly powerful and armed with weapons that seemed to turn human armor into paper. The Korath soldiers moved in formation with terrifying efficiency, their bright, bioluminescent armor making them appear like a swarm of insects under the city's lights. But humanity wasn't retreating. The humans had something that no invader could have prepared for: resilience. The 3rd and 7th Mobile Divisions pushed forward with all their might, firing anti-vehicle rounds and deploying energy shields to block the Korath's deadly plasma bursts. A group of soldiers led by Sergeant Samuel Richards found themselves pinned down near one of the Korath transport ships. The Koraths had established a foothold in the heart of Central Park, and the human defenses were struggling to break the alien formation. We've got to push them back, or we'll lose the city. Richards shouted over the comms as his unit fired at the Koraths, their shots splintering off the Koraths' shields. I have an idea, Corporal Elena Diaz said, her voice tight with determination. I'll take a team and sabotage their landing gear. We'll ground them long enough for you to break their lines. Richards nodded grimly. Make it fast. We don't have much time. Diaz led her small team toward the nearest transport ship, ducking behind cover as Korath warriors closed in. The alien soldiers, sleek and deadly, were advancing with terrifying precision. Diaz's team moved with a practiced stealth, planting explosives along the underbelly of the ship's engines. Set the charges, Diaz ordered as she positioned herself under the massive craft. This is our only shot. The moment the charges detonated, the ground shook. A massive explosion sent debris flying into the air, and the transport ship toppled over, its systems failing as it crashed to the ground. The Koraths screamed in unison, a sound more chilling than any weapon, and their formation faltered. Nice work, Diaz. Richards called over the comms. That'll slow them down. But as the explosion resounded across the battlefield, the Koraths responded quickly, launching a barrage of missiles at the human positions. The streets erupted in flames, but humanity was not backing down. They were fighting, inch by inch, for every square foot of the city. Back at Earth's orbital command, Captain Brody stared at the battle unfolding below. The fight for New York was only the beginning. The Koraths had launched their ground assault, but humanity's resistance was growing stronger by the hour. The Koraths may have been technologically superior, but they had underestimated one thing: humanity's will to survive. We're not losing this, Brody muttered to herself. Not this time. As the battle for New York raged on, the war had just entered a new chapter. The Koraths had shown their might, but humanity was not backing down. It would take everything humanity had to push them back, but Brody knew one thing for sure: the Koraths would never have the home field advantage again. The battle for New York had turned into an unprecedented clash, a brutal dance of survival where neither side was willing to yield. The Koraths had the firepower, the technology, and the overwhelming numbers. But humanity had something more: determination, unity, and the strength to fight for their very existence. Captain Amelia Brody stood in Earth's orbital command center, eyes fixed on the live feeds from the battlefield below. The reports were grim, but there was an undeniable shift in momentum. Humanity wasn't just defending its cities anymore, it was starting to fight back. Captain, Lieutenant Klein's voice broke through the tension. We've received reports from multiple resistance groups across the globe. They're not just holding positions, they're actively launching counterattacks against Korath supply lines. Brody's brow furrowed. Resistance groups? How large are they? We're still gathering intel, Klein responded, but it seems like small, coordinated units have formed in the wake of the invasion. civilians, soldiers, even some defectors from the Korets, everyone's fighting back in some form. A wave of relief washed over Brody. She had always believed that humanity's strength lay in its unity, and now it was beginning to show. The resistance wasn't a centralized force. It was a network of cells spread across the globe, using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the Korets and prevent them from consolidating their control. "Keep me updated on the Resistance's movements," Brody ordered. "We need to know where they're striking next." Back on the ground in New York, Sergeant Samuel Richards and his squad had become part of that resistance. After their success in taking down one of the Koreth transports, they had managed to regroup and join forces with other scattered units. The Korets, while still possessing overwhelming strength, had been forced to adapt to the guerrilla warfare tactics that humanity had perfected over centuries. Richards crouched low behind a barricade, surveying the ruins of Central Park. The area had been completely ravaged, but the Korets were far from victorious. Small units of human soldiers, civilians with basic weaponry, and local militias had taken control of several strategic points. They had learned to use the city's infrastructure as a weapon, turning its streets, tunnels, and rooftops into traps for the Korets. "We've been getting good intel from the civilians," Richard said, scanning the area through his tactical visor. "They know the city better than any of us. They've been guiding us to weak spots in Koreth's supply lines. This is our chance to disrupt their communications." Corporal Elena Diaz, who had once again become a crucial part of the resistance, nodded. "We've got a window of opportunity. The Korets are overextended in their attempts to secure Manhattan. We need to hit their communications hub in the financial district. If we take it down, we'll cripple their command structure." Richards glanced at his squad, a sense of resolve hardening his features. They had survived one of the hardest battles humanity had ever faced, and now they were being asked to strike deep behind enemy lines. "All right, team," Richard said, rallying his soldiers. "We hit the hub, then we get out. Fast and clean. Stay low, stay sharp. We do this together." The squad moved quickly through the shattered remains of the city, staying out of sight of Koreth patrols and using the ruins as cover. They passed by civilian groups who, with hastily crafted weapons and makeshift armor, had taken to defending their neighborhoods. In a strange, unspoken way, the war was uniting humanity, unifying them in a common cause. Meanwhile, back in the command center, Brody watched as the small resistance cells around the globe began to cooperate more closely. The Korets had thought they could quash any human resistance with their overwhelming force. They were wrong. Humanity had proved that it could turn the tide, even against impossible odds. "I'm seeing increased coordination between resistance cells," Klein reported, his eyes glued to the data stream. "They've got communication networks up and running, and they're starting to share resources. It's becoming a global effort." Brody clenched her fists. "It's more than just survival now. We've got to make them pay for every inch of ground they've taken. We're fighting for our homes, our future. We can't stop until they're gone." As if on cue, Commander Aaron Walker entered the command center, his face hard with determination. "Captain, I've been briefed on the Resistance's progress. They're not just harassing Koreth's supply lines anymore. They're beginning to seize ground, and the Korets are stretched thin." Brody turned to face him. "What does that mean, Commander?" "Means we're getting a window of opportunity," Walker said, his voice steady. "If we push hard, now, we can knock the Korets back. But we need to hit them with everything we've got." Brody nodded, her mind already working through the strategies. The Korets had underestimated humanity's ability to resist. They had thought the human race would collapse in the face of their superior technology, but instead, the world had risen. Every skirmish, every counterattack was a testament to humanity's refusal to surrender. "I'm initiating a full-scale counteroffensive," Brody declared. "We can't afford to wait for another chance. The resistance is our foothold. It's time to take back Earth." As the orders were sent, the tide of the war began to turn. The resistance, bolstered by the might of the United Earth Federation's military forces, began launching coordinated attacks against the Koreth strongholds. They struck quickly, decisively, and without mercy. And in New York, Richards and his squad, backed by local civilians, stormed the Korath communications hub. Explosions rang out, sending shockwaves through the alien network. The resistance had struck a critical blow. Humanity was no longer just defending, it was on the offense. The Koraths had underestimated the human spirit. Now, it was humanity's turn to make them regret it. The resistance had awakened, and the Koraths would soon know just how wrong they were to ever think they could conquer Earth. The battle had escalated, and humanity was no longer just reacting to the Koraths, they were attacking. Every city, every country that had suffered under the weight of the Koraths' tyranny was beginning to fight back in ways that even the invaders hadn't anticipated. The resistance, once small and fragmented, had grown into a powerful force. And the Koraths, for the first time, found themselves on the defensive. Captain Amelia Brodie stood before the command center's holographic map, watching as human forces coordinated a global counteroffensive. The war was still far from won, but the signs of hope were undeniable. Reports were flooding in from every continent: victories in the jungles of South America, guerrilla tactics in Europe, and mass uprisings in Africa. Humanity had become a united front, driven by a singular, unyielding desire to reclaim their world. "Captain, we've received word from the front lines in Europe," Commander Walker said, his voice filled with barely contained excitement. "The Koraths are retreating from Paris. Our forces are pushing them back." Brodie's lips twitched into a smile. "That's the first major victory in Europe. How are the ground units holding?" "They're holding strong," Walker replied. "The resistance there has been ferocious. We've got combined arms on the ground, infantry, mobile units, drones, coordinated strikes from all angles. The Koraths are scattering." It was a pivotal moment in the war. The Koraths, who had once believed they were unstoppable, were now realizing that humanity would not yield. The fight for Earth had become a global effort, and the unity between the world's forces was undeniable. In Paris, Sergeant Samuel Richards and his squad had been part of the spearhead of the assault. The Koraths had set up a stronghold in the city's outskirts, and it was up to the resistance and Earth's military forces to drive them out. Richards adjusted his helmet as he crouched behind cover, watching through the scope of his rifle. His squad was positioned near a collapsed building on the outskirts of the city, awaiting the signal to move. The Koraths had been relentless in their attempts to hold the city, but the resistance had taken advantage of their overconfidence and pushed them to the brink. "This is it," Richards muttered to himself, the weight of the moment settling over him. "The Koraths never thought it would come to this." "Yeah, but they're not going to like what's coming next," Diaz replied, her voice laced with confidence. The signal came. Richards rose from behind cover, signaling for his squad to follow as they sprinted across the city streets, weaving in and out of ruins, dodging Korath patrols and incoming fire. The Koraths had been stretched thin, and now was the time to strike the final blow. The plan was simple: break through the Korath stronghold's defenses, take out their leadership, and force them into a full retreat. The Koraths, once the conquerors, were now fighting for their very survival. "Target the command center," Richards barked. "Cut off their communication. This ends today." Back in Earth's orbital command, Brodie watched the battle unfold on the monitors. Richards and his team were making their move in Paris, and every strike brought them closer to victory. The coordination between the global resistance and the military was seamless, each unit playing its part in the larger war effort. "This is it, people," Brodie said, addressing her commanders. "We've got the Koraths on the ropes. We hit them hard now, and we can end this war." Her voice was filled with a quiet resolve. The war had tested humanity in ways no one could have predicted, but it had also shown what they were capable of when they stood together. The Koraths had underestimated their resolve, and now humanity was determined to make them pay for every life lost, every city burned, and every family torn apart. Richard's squad pushed deeper into the Korath stronghold. The city had become a war zone, but there was a strange sense of hope in the air. The Koraths were no longer the invincible force they had once seemed. They were scrambling, and for the first time, the humans were in control. Explosions echoed as resistance fighters breached the outer defenses of the Korath Command Center. Richards and Diaz led the charge, cutting through enemy lines with brutal efficiency. The Koraths, overwhelmed by the scale of the human resistance, fought back fiercely, but it was clear that the tide had turned. They were no longer the invaders, they were the ones on the run. "Push forward!" Richards shouted as he advanced with his squad. The Korath Command Center was in sight, and the final blow was within reach. Diaz planted explosives on the central data hub, just as the Koraths tried to launch a counterattack. The explosion rang out, and the Koraths' communication systems went dark. "Command Center is down," Diaz yelled. "The Koraths can't coordinate their forces anymore." Richards smiled grimly. "This is it. They've lost." Back at Earth's orbital command, Brody stood, watching the last piece of the puzzle fall into place. The Koraths had been defeated in Paris, but that was just the beginning. Resistance cells were reporting victories across the globe. Africa, Asia, and the Middle East were seeing the same results. The Koraths were retreating, their hold on Earth slipping away with every passing hour. But the war wasn't over yet. The Koraths still had a fleet, still had the firepower to strike back. "We're not finished yet," Brody muttered to herself. "But we've got the upper hand. And we're going to keep it." The resistance was alive and well, and humanity's will to survive had proven stronger than any alien invasion force. Earth would not fall. The Koraths would learn that lesson the hard way. And in the coming days, they would face the full fury of a united human race determined to take back its world. The Koraths had underestimated humanity before. But they would not make that mistake again. The Koraths, once an unstoppable force, were now reeling. Earth had become a battlefield where humanity's unbreakable resolve had begun to wear down the alien invaders, one victory at a time. The once formidable Korath fleet was in retreat, their forces fractured and scrambling to regroup. But the war wasn't over. Humanity had won battles, taken back cities, and liberated regions, but to truly end the invasion, the Koraths needed to be driven from Earth entirely. Captain Amelia Brody stood in the heart of the Earth Federation's command center, staring at the final map that would determine the course of the war. The Korath fleet was cornered now, but they had one final weapon left, a superweapon, capable of mass destruction, a doomsday device that could wipe out entire regions in one strike. It was the last card the Koraths had to play, and humanity was determined to stop it before they could launch it. "This is it," Brody said, her voice steely with resolve. "We need to end this, once and for all." "Agreed, Captain," Commander Walker replied. "We've got intel that the Korath superweapon is located on the outskirts of their final stronghold, a heavily fortified compound in the center of the Pacific. If we take that out, the Korath fleet won't have the strength to retaliate." Brody's eyes narrowed. The risk was enormous. If they failed, Earth would face unimaginable devastation. But failure was no longer an option. Too much had been lost, and humanity had already proven its will to fight. It was time to end this. "Launch the final assault," Brody ordered. "No one gets left behind. We take the superweapon, or we die trying." On the ground in the Pacific, Sergeant Samuel Richards and his squad had received the orders to take the Korath superweapon compound. They were no strangers to danger, but this mission felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about vengeance, about making the Koraths pay for everything they had done to Earth. Richards looked at his team, Diaz, Walker, and the others. Each face was hardened by the battles they'd fought and survived, each soldier carrying the weight of the war's horrors. But they were not afraid. The time for fear was over. "We breach the compound, disable their defenses, and make our way to the superweapon," Richard said, his voice low but filled with authority. "No matter what happens, we end this here." The squad moved out, their mission clear: infiltrate the Korath base, destroy their doomsday weapon, and cripple their ability to strike back. Every step forward was fraught with danger, the Koraths fighting desperately to protect their last hope. As they approached the compound, an eerie silence fell over the area. The once vibrant Pacific Islands now lay in ruins, and the Korath base stood as a stark symbol of the alien empire's attempt to conquer Earth. The soldiers crept forward, using the landscape to their advantage, avoiding patrols and setting traps for the enemy. "We're almost there," Diaz whispered, scanning the area with her rifle. "Just a little further." But as they closed in on the compound's perimeter, the Koraths knew they were coming. The air erupted with gunfire, and the ground shook as explosions rang out. The Koraths were entrenched, defending their final stronghold with everything they had left. But Richards and his squad pressed forward, using their training, their unity, and their sheer willpower to cut through the alien resistance. "Keep moving. We can't stop now," Richards shouted, charging into the fray. The soldiers followed, firing back as Korath forces began to swarm from the compound's depths. Diaz planted explosives on the perimeter defenses, blowing apart the Korath shields and allowing the team to push forward. The compound's gates fell, and the final battle for Earth's survival began. Back in orbit, Captain Brody and Commander Walker watched the feed from the ground assault. The Korath stronghold was under attack, but they could only wait and hope their forces on the ground would succeed. Brody clenched her fists, every fiber of her being focused on the mission's outcome. "We've come too far to fail now," Brody said, more to herself than anyone else. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The feeds flickered and crackled, but the resistance fighters on the ground continued to advance, fighting through every wave of Korath soldiers. Richard's squad was pushing closer to the superweapons core, every step bringing them closer to victory, and the moment when they would end the Korath occupation of Earth forever. Inside the Korath compound, Richards and his squad finally breached the inner sanctum. The Korath superweapon stood in front of them, massive, foreboding, and surrounded by layers of defenses. But it was nothing humanity couldn't handle. "Get those charges ready," Richards barked. "We disable this thing, and the war ends here." As Diaz placed the final charges, the countdown began. The Koraths had one last attempt at stopping them, but it was too late. A final explosion rocked the compound as the charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the facility. The superweapon was destroyed, and with it, the Koraths' ability to strike back. The Korath forces, now leaderless and broken, began to fall apart. The remnants of their fleet scattered into deep space, desperate to escape the wrath of humanity. Back at the command center, Brody's eyes flickered to the final reports. The Korath fleet was in full retreat. The superweapon was destroyed. The war, after years of struggle, had finally come to an end. "We did it," Commander Walker said, his voice filled with awe and relief. Brody allowed herself a small smile. "No. Humanity did it." The human race had faced an enemy more powerful than any they could have imagined. But through unity, strength, and an unyielding spirit, they had prevailed. The Earth was free. And as Brody looked out at the stars, she knew one thing for certain: humanity would never again be underestimated.